welcome to Paint by Blunders. Firstly, I just wanted to apologise because I haven't put out a video in so long. If I'm completely honest, I hit a bit of a lull with my painting and my hobby time. I think we all get those sort of plateaus where we just don't, we're not quite feeling it and we take a step back. But with the release of Skaventide and 4th edition, I am very excited for things to come in the world of AOS. I love all things GW. I just love it as an IP. I think it's fantastic. But Age of Sigmar and the fantasy stuff, that is my jam. I didn't get the box early. I'm not that guy. But I did try to get this video out as soon as I could. So I built my clan rats ASAP, painted them up with very little planning, and I think the scheme looks pretty good. I'm really happy with it. It's fast. It's a little bit grimdark, which I prefer. And yeah, they look good on the tabletop, very little effort and nice and simple. So I hope you enjoy the video. Apologies, the editing, etc. is not to my normal standard of what I like to put out, but I wanted to get it out ASAP because unfortunately with anyone who puts out any sort of video on YouTube, you are an absolute slave to the algorithm. It's an unfortunate, but it is what it is essentially. So the audio isn't the best because I've been editing it out of here, but I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learned something. I certainly did. And yeah, hopefully I will see you on the next one. Enjoy.
Hello. So this is our lovely little clan rat. And all I've done primer wise is airbrushed some, I think it's a Vallejo Mecha Colour Grey. But all I wanted to demonstrate really is that you can prime them any which way you like. We're just going to try and get some good colour on them and get them on the table. So starting off, we are going to dive into the metallics and silver to start with. For all his armour, his chainmail and his weapon, etc. For this, I'm going to use Vallejo's Metal Colour Steel. It is an airbrush paint, but you can apply it with a brush. But be warned, it is very watery. If you don't have this, it's a great thing to have in your arsenal, but if you've got any sort of lighter silver, it will do the job just fine for how we need this to act later on down the line. We are obviously going to try and be careful with this sort of method of painting, but the only advantage is, I call this the ugly method. You get all your layers on first, and then you wash the entire model with one single wash. That way, at any point, if you make any mistakes, you can constantly go back and forth and correct them as you go. After all, this is Paint by Blunders. So, we're going to continue with the metallics, and we're going to use Runelord Brass. Great little colour. I really like this. I don't use it enough, I've discovered. And I'm going to just accent any of the metallic parts with this, just to add a little bit of interest to the model, if I'm honest. I would say it doesn't have the greatest coverage, so with a lot of these paints that I'm using on here, the classic tried and true method of 2 thin coats will work wonders. Once that's done, we're going to start moving on to the green sections, and for that I'm going to use Orruck Flesh. And just to add a bit of variety to your models or your unit, jump between, like change whether it's going to be the bottom half of his clothing to the top half. Just mix it up, adds a nice bit of variety to the unit, makes it a bit more eye-catching and with no effort at all. Again, give it a good shake before you go, a little bit of water on the wet palette, and again 2 coats. The stronger this base coat goes down, the easier it is later down the line. Once you've done the green sections, we are going to start working on the browns, which are like the leathers, the wood, any straps, and you can use any mid-tone brown for this. I'm going to use warm brown, but you could easily use Mornfang brown from Games Workshop. And again, I would encourage you, these are 20-man units or 20 rat units. Mix it up. You could do 10 one way, 10 another. And while it might not be that much of a change, on the tabletop, it adds a nice bit of variety, again, for very little effort. the reason why I like doing belts and stuff fairly early is because it gives you a nice clean edge to work into with the, the bottom half of the robes. I find if I do the belts after the robe, 9 times out of 10, I will clip it. So once the brown is done, we are going to start looking at that lower robe. And I'm going to use one of my favourite paints, Rakarth Flesh. I find this so versatile and I use it for all sorts of stuff. But on our little clan rat, we're going to use it on the lower cloths, and I'm also going to do his teeth and his claws. You can also use it on, like, if there's any fabric wraps you want to do on like weapon hilts. It's quite effective there as well. And because it's such small details on the model, and again, these battle line units are 20, I'm not too fussed about picking out a slightly different creamy tone to do these other things. Like, these guys are going to get wiped off the table pretty quick. I still want them to look nice, but at the same time, it's not a hero that I'm going to, spend ages on. Swiftly moving on, because we have a lot of these little guys to do, we're going to start looking at his skin, and I'm going to use Bugmens Glow, another absolute classic GW paint. It is fantastic for skin tones as a base. It can even be a top coat. It's a really nice colour, and I'm going to be putting 2 coats of this on. And one thing to note is just with the legs and the hands, it's just how far up you want to go, that transition to where sort of fur meets flesh. Just gauge it on what you like. Again, with the ugly method of painting, you can constantly go back and forth and adjust it until we get sort of the wash stage, and even after that you can still adjust it. So there's no stress, it's just do whatever you think looks best for your little rat friend. So even at this stage, our ugly system of painting clan rat sort of reminds me of when I first started painting way back when, and that's probably how I put them on the tabletop. But for the fur, I'm going to use German grey, but you could easily use Administratum grey, Eschen grey, or a mix between the two. Again, each one could be slightly different for very little effort, and it just adds a little bit of variety. And we're just going to go around and just put on, again, 2 thin coats on all those furry bits. So once the grey is done, I'm going to come in and layer the flesh tones before I do any of the shading or finishing touches. I'm just going to use Scale Colours Light Skin, and I'm going to mix it in with the Bugmens Glow about 50-50, just so it isn't as extreme, but you can go as extreme as you like. And all I'm doing is trying to avoid the deepest recesses around his face, and the legs and hands, etc. I'm not really trying to cover it too much. I'm just adding, as you would, sort of more traditional highlights and layers, but I'm not too fussed about the accuracy and how neat it is, because the more grimdark style, it's just to add a little bit of punch for when we add the wash. And on the tail, I mean, you could perfectly line every one of the sections of his tail, but I'm just sort of roughly doing it. Again, when these are on the table, they're going to look great from 12 inches plus away, and no one's going to be like, that wasn't the most accurate paint job on his tail. So I'm just going to do his mouth and the Stormcast helmet just before washing. Obviously this is completely down to whatever theme, so just do that how you wish. Now, Streak and Grime, the stuff I love. It works so well, but we're going to use it slightly different. You've got 2 ways of doing it this time. You can either whack it on completely pure, like I've done in some of my other videos, but when you've got 20 of these guys, that's not necessarily the most effective way of doing it. So we're just going to use some of that white spirit, that thinner, before we apply it to the model. So it is essentially just a thicker, more dirty Agrax Earthshade. You have other options. You could just use a normal oil paint and just make up your own wash. But If you've not experimented with oil paints before, I highly recommend you start with streak and grime and then venture into the world of oil colours. I love oil colours. 90% of the models I paint don't use normal washes. I only ever use oil washes. I love how they work with miniature painting. I think it's fantastic and I wish I got into it way sooner. So we're just going to put a little bit in our little mixing palette. Apologies, it's not a cleaner palette. It would make it a little bit easier to see what's going on here. And just a couple of drops of thinner. I'm using the Winsor & Newton artist thinner. I think I got it from the range because it was fairly cheap at the time. I think it was £6 or £7 for a big tub of it. It looks like a little oil can, but you can just use hardware store methylated spirits or white spirit. The only advantage with this stuff is it doesn't really smell, whereas the white spirit I used to use absolutely reeked. So I've thinned this down and I'm just going to apply it all over the model. Every nook and cranny I'm going to cover in this stuff. And you can apply it as thick or as thin as you like. You could, for safety, if you've never done this before, you can make it a little bit thinner because there's nothing stopping you from letting it completely dry and applying a second coat. Albeit where it's slightly thinned down, you want to leave it a little bit longer, but that's what you can do. Oils are magic. So now that's dry, you can either leave it like this and have him fairly grimdark and dirty, which is absolutely fine, and then you can either battle ready or highlight from there. Or we can take a little bit of our white spirit again, and I use one of these little sponges, and all I'm going to do is just lightly dunk it in and then almost use it as a dry brush just to wick away some of that oil wash residue. And as you can see, it looks super bright underneath and you can create some really interesting effects. You can do streaks down with it by just dragging the sponge down. You can dab it and it adds like a mottled effect. Very effective as well. If you don't have any of these little sponges, you can use an old paintbrush, but I think I picked these up from Temu or something. I think they're about £1.50 for 50 of these things, and they're great. So this is him done. This is what I would call the super fast battle ready version. You just got to dot the I's and base him. I'm going to quickly go through a rough basing process that I use. AK concrete. I'm going to just quickly slap that on to create a bit of texture. After that, I'm going to use German grey and rattling grime mixed together about 70-30 in favour of the contrast, and that is it. If you want to leave it here, that is absolutely fine, and they look great. They'll be on the table nice and fast. But I'm going to go through a few additional steps just to make them pop a little bit more. The easiest way for me to describe this is use the original base colours and just add a little edge highlight. And that's pretty much it, but we're going to go through it anyway. First up, we have our Rakarth Flesh, and I'm just doing the edges and the highest creases. Next up, we are back on the Orruck Green. If you wanted to take this one a little bit further, you could put in a little bit of Nurgling Green or like a yellowy tone just to push it a little bit more. For the fur, whatever colour you decided to use on the palette should be absolutely fine, but again you could just knock in a little bit of lighter grey just to push it a bit more. I've added a touch of administratum grey to the German grey that I used. And all I'm doing is picking up the highest points where light would hit. Next up, the browns. Same thing, you can just use a slightly lighter brown. I've added a touch of cream to this just to try and push it a bit further. For the flesh tones, again, the one that I used pre-wash, so the 50-50 of the light skin tone and the Bugmens, I've just used that to put some scratchy highlights. Now, onto the jazzy stuff. If you want to add any patina or verdigris, these are your three classic options. If you've got the oxide from GW, that is great, and go with that. I will later on do a shootout between the three of these, the oil wash, the dirty down, and the GW, just to see what effects you can get and what is best for that particular project. But I'm going to be using the dirty down Verdigris. I'm really not going to be using very much of it. You can slap this on quite a lot and get some really dramatic effects. Whatever works best for you, really. In hindsight, I probably should have used a bit more of this. But you can just give it a shake. It's water soluble, so your brushes are fairly safe, and normally enough in the lid deposits for you to use. And all I'm going to do is just dot it on sort of the bolts on any of the brass sections. The next big technical, rust. Again, so many different versions. There's the dirty down, there's the oil-based rust streaks, and there's pigment powder rust. All are fantastic. Again, all do different things. The dirty down rust is brilliant. The AK rust I use quite a bit, but I have got a little way of doing rust at the minute, which I really enjoy, and that involves using the pigment powder. And I'm going to show you how I use it, because I think this looks great. So you get the pigment powder and the pigment fixer, which you can find from your local hobby store. No affiliate links here. No one cares about this. And basically you just put a little bit of the pigment in a mixing palette. If you don't have these, I highly recommend you pick some up off Amazon or eBay. They're pretty reasonable and pretty cheap. I really like these little metal ones because they're easy to clean. And you can see there's some residue of silver and rust in there from earlier. Just a tiny little dab of this rust and add a drop of pigment fixer. Give it a good mix, and don't get me wrong, trust the process, it looks horrible. And we are just going to smother the area we want to be rusty. And about 30 seconds or so after you've applied this, it will go tacky really fast. So we just want to get a little bit of kitchen roll and just start dabbing away and just sort of pulling lightly against the paint, and that will leave a really natural looking rust effect. And with that, he's done. Wait, I've completely forgot one step. Tiny little step, but you don't have to do it on all your clan rats, but it'll help you with your heroes going forward. 50-50 Caraba Crimson, or however it's pronounced, and just put that over his face and any of the warty spots. Maybe not do it with every clan rat, but this will serve you well as a tip for your heroes, just to really make their faces look mean. And that is it. Thank you very much for checking out this video. I hope this helps you whiz through your clan rats, and I hope you're excited for AOS 4. Also, I want to show you just at the very end a couple of honourable mentions. This is Mephiston Red over German Grey, and this is Rakarth Flesh over Screamer Pink. Same method all round.